Thank you so much. And it's my pleasure to be here for the first annual Ketofest. I'm going to be a little more scientific today than last Friday. If you were unable to attend the HEAL event, we were able to give a lot more clinical stories, that sort of thing. So I'm going to be putting on the professor hat at the moment, the science behind keto lifestyles, and just a little bit about my background. I've been at Duke since 1990, and I'm the chairman or past president of the Obesity Medicine Association, which is the largest group of obesity medicine specialists in the world. This method that I use is something that we've been teaching at the Obesity Medicine Association for over 10 years now, and a lot of other doctors learn how to do this through that organization. I'm also a fellow of the Obesity Society, which is the research organization worldwide where you would go to present research on obesity treatments. I'm editor of a textbook called Obesity Evaluation and Treatment Essentials, which is now in its second edition, that is basically designed for physicians on how to help people lose weight or fix all of the obesity-associated medical problems that occur. I'm author of The New Atkins for a New You, which came out now 7 years ago, 2010, but it's a good roadmap. Steve Finney and Jeff Volek are my co-authors on that book, and because Steve and Jeff and my small contribution to it are on it, it's really kind of the only book you ever need to read about nutrition if you want to get the big story on nutrition. You don't have to read a book. There are a lot of other ways to go about doing this, but it's my pleasure to be here. And you've heard a little bit about the story of how everything got messed up. Looking at the Time magazine covers here, 2014, Eat Butter, how the scientists labeled fat the enemy and why they were wrong. It's the actual words on there. It's good, I think the first pop culture introduction of eating fat being good. And so if you're trying to convince other people that this might be okay, you might go to that source. It was my honor to be mentioned in that issue as one of the obesity medicine experts saying that it was okay. But this world of science is a little different. The observational work had gone on before the clinical trial work, which is not what you expect with a drug. But so we have countries going low carb. You may have seen this slide from Andreas Eenfeldt, dietdoctor.com, where butter consumption has gone up in Sweden, and yet heart attacks still go down. And so if eating butter or eating fat was always bad, this isn't the situation that you would expect to see. And then we have another country, these are relatively small countries, and South Africa has gone low carb or keto because of the exercise benefits that can occur. So Tim Noakes, Professor Noakes, is a big proponent of low carb, high fat diets. He gets up in public and says, I was wrong, and how he was teaching people for a long time to carb load, and now he teaches people to not eat carbs. If you are going to do this for exercise, you may have to do this for months before you get the maximal benefit. If you want all those details, again, it's not a randomized controlled trial. It's a documentary film called Serial Killers 2, serial, I mean C-E-R-E-A-L, not S-E-R-I-A-L. And there's a lot of information in there about elite athletes doing low carb, high fat now, winning races in record time or doing things that they didn't think they could. Then how did this year become a year of expanded grassroots change? It's because this is a grassroots change that's occurring. Nutritional ketosis and the conference in Tampa is an incredible resource now that is going to be slated to be every year, and it grows every year. Low Carb Breckenridge, so there are these doctors and folks like you who get together to recharge batteries and share information. That's Jeff Gerber and Rod Taylor. who does low carb down under in Australia, the Heal Care Forum in West Virginia, low carb cruise. Here we are at Ketofest. I also want to point out KetoCon in Austin and Keto 101 low carb cruise out of Boston for the first time this fall, etc. So how does this all happen, and what are we talking about, right? So if you're the first time listening about this, we defined what low carb and ketogenic meant in a paper 10 years ago, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And keto basically means that you're running on fat for your major energy source, so that the areas of the body that were previously fueled by glucose are now fueled by molecules called ketone bodies, or keto for short. So basically, the language is changing into fat burning machine, being in ketosis, ketogenic. It's all a matter of the number of carbs that you eat. And we define it as best we could, maybe in crude terms, the total number of grams of carbs eaten over the course of a day. And so the typical American diet is very high, and once you get under 50 or optimally, or the lower you go on the total carbohydrates for the day, the more likely it is for you to change to fat burning or have ketone bodies go up in the blood, and that's, blood. Now, how do you measure ketosis? So this is changing. This is evolving. We used to measure the urine, and any time there was urine ketone, there are 3 types of ketone bodies. Well, this is confusing. So it's evolving. It's going from crude terms to scientific terms to mechanism, and yet this has been done since 1863 in the Western world, the first mention of a low-carb diet by William Banting in England. So anyway, so a lot of the confusion comes around, it's almost like the early precincts in an election. The first 10% of people come in and you have a good idea of who's going to win, and yet now we have more and more people being studied in ketosis, and that's why things change. That someone criticized me but you did this YouTube video 10 years ago and you said that. And I said, yeah, because I'm a scientist, things have changed, and now I say this, because this is what we know. And I'm sure that's why many of you are here, to try to get the latest information as this evolves. So you could check the urine, the blood, or the breath. Who knows, one day we might be able to check the skin and then define keto. So anyway, that's why in terms of mechanism and being precise about the diagnosis of ketosis, or the definition of it, it's just not all that precise. Or you can just look at total carbs. If you functionally have appetite suppression, you're losing weight or inches, you're in some sort of fat burning state because you're losing your body fat. That is the historically clinical definition of being in ketosis. So you don't have to measure really anything other than how your body's responding. So now add into more confusion. A lot of people, because the medical world isn't really well versed in this, will go to the bookstore. Here's the confusion. So not every low carb diet is a keto diet. There are some that have it. One of my teachers, Jackie Eberstein, and Dr. Atkins, the Atkins book under that name, this would be the first phase, or the induction phase of Atkins. And when I met Dr. Atkins and Jackie Eberstein back in 1998, I learned that they were keeping people low carb, keto induction level for a long time. And what was controversial then is that we didn't know if it was safe. And so now, almost 20 years later, the studies have all come out saying that best we can tell, it's safe. It's not only effective, but it is safe. So keto doesn't necessarily mean no carbs. There are good carbs and bad carbs, and so those of you who've been doing this for a while, you figure out which vegetables you like. So basically the good carbs are the vegetables. That's the easy answer. Pretty much all Pwop diets eliminate the bad carbs, or the high glycemic carbs, or the junk foods, if you will. In the big scheme of things, yeah, there are good carbs and bad carbs, but going back to the definition of keto, it's the number of total carb grams over the course of the day. I have 3, hour-long slide decks, one on obesity, one on metabolic syndrome, one on diabetes. I've compressed it for this time to just show you the best level evidence for obesity and metabolic syndrome. I'm not going to really deal with diabetes today. So going back to 1863, the first report in the Western literature was the letter on corpulence by William Banting in London. And that was we would call that a case study today. But if you went to any of the doctors in England, they would put you on the Banting diet. It would be, it was like a verb. I bant, you bant, he bants. It was that commonly known. Coming at it as a scientist, I really first wanted to know, is it safe to study this? Do humans really need to eat carbohydrate? And the best resource that we have that's unbiased, meaning there really is very little political influence or industry influence, is the Institute of Medicine dietary reference intakes. And actually, they state pretty clearly that you don't have to eat carbohydrate in the food because there's no essential carbohydrate, meaning we can make the carbohydrate we need internally from other foods, from other resources. It was thought of that the amount of brain requirement of glucose meant that you had to eat that. There are world experts who forgot or didn't know that the body can make glucose on its own. So here it's the internal and external amount of glucose that's needed when you're a sugar burner. When you're a sugar burner because you're a sugar eater, remember carbs include starches and sugar, and your brain is going to be using primarily glucose. However, if you change to become a fat burner, meaning you're eating mostly fat for your fuel source and you're using ketones, that's called keto adaptation, the brain can actually switch to using ketones. And that's why many of you notice better mental clarity, less sleepiness, better sleeping, all those sorts of things. Again, that's just the clinical observation we see over and over again. So it was pretty clear to me looking at this from a researcher standpoint, in order to study this, it was okay to study diets that had very little carbohydrate because the best evidence that we had suggested that you didn't have to eat carbohydrate. So of all the different studies that looked at low fat and low carb side by side, I pulled this one out because it was in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is one of the best regarded medical journals that we have. And it was done in Israel, where they had control of the noonday meal. So one of the problems I have as a clinical researcher is if I do a study and people go home, we tell them to do different things, I don't really know what they've done. And they can come back and tell me they've eaten this, and yet I don't really know because I didn't watch them all the time. But they had control of the primary meal of the day there. So of all the studies, it had a little more certainty of what was actually being consumed during that study. So here, it's kind of my look at this is that all these diets can work. And one diet might work better than another, or lifestyle. And so you've heard some people conclude, well, it doesn't matter what diet you do, just stick to the one you can stick with. That's the best diet. But it's more complicated than that. But that is one way to look at it. You can look at this and say low carb did better. The problem with this study, though, is when the study kept going on and on, there was less and less contact, less with the staff, less and less support. And so all of the diets ended up doing worse over time. And you and I know that you can actually do this for a long time. Many of you have done that and had great success beyond this. So this, again, it's kind of the early precincts in an election, but it definitely shows in high-level study in the New England Journal of Medicine what can happen with a low-carb diet. The access to the information is one of the roadblocks, and the best website that I've seen so far. First, it was Diet Doctor that had the science, dietdoctor.com. Now the Public Health Collaboration in the UK has a very user-friendly interface to let even your doctor, you could go in the office on an iPhone and show, here are the 50 studies lined up, low carb, low fat, the numbers right there. So thank you to the Public Health Collaboration in the UK for making the knowledge even more accessible. So the take-home point about the research that's been done is that the ketogenic diets lead to weight loss and also improvements in metabolic syndrome in people affected by obesity. And the studies of studies now that we don't really cite individual studies, we look at studies of studies, and public health and health organizations want to see what's known as meta-analyses, and now there are at least 5 meta-analyses of this first round of low-carb versus low-fat science looking at obesity and metabolic syndrome. So it's pretty much studied to the level of, here's the summary slide of the metabolic syndrome. So again, lots of diets can work, which is confusing. Lots of diets can work partially because of the metabolism of an individual. Very strange high-carb diets can work for those who don't have insulin resistance. They don't work so well with those who have insulin resistance. But if you look at head-to-head kinds of studies, the low-fat diet does target LDL better, although the type of LDL matters, and the type of LDL will get better on the low-carb as well. But the obvious better way for communicating this is to look at the triglyceride in the blood and the HDLs, and that has separated it apart, the low-carb and low-fat ways. So it's not just weight loss, but it's also the change in metabolism. The change in metabolism is different whether you choose a low-carb or a low-fat diet. So while our research at Duke and Will Yancey has done most of the studies with me at Duke, Will has been continually funded through the VA to continue to study low-carb, high-fat diets, including into diabetes, and comparing the low-carb diet to diets and drugs. And it does as good or better than orlistat and a low-fat diet combined in a study that he did at the VA. I was happy to help Leslyn Keith look at an understudied group of people with lymphedema and now even lipedema. These are rather uncommon kinds of obesity that, again, no one knows what to do, and the world experts say bariatric surgery is really the only thing that works. You know, where have you heard that before? And so Leslyn did a pilot study on people with lymphedema, and she randomized, it was not randomized, she brought people in just as a pilot study where everyone got the diet. And for those people in blue who did the low-carb, high-fat diet, or keto diet in this case, because it was low enough in carbs to be ketogenic by whatever definition you wanted, there was a weight change here in pounds from 15 to 25 pounds over this relatively short-term study. And she received a national award last year for her presentation on this kind of diet. And what's fascinating is I'm reminded of when I first got into just obesity treatment 20 years ago. There were all of these anecdotal reports of people getting better on the low-carb, high-fat diet. And I would show slide after slide of 100 case studies of low-carb working for obesity. And I'd be in front of these very serious scientists, and they say, well, those don't count. Those anecdotes don't count. And so it's fun to see the science backing up what your experience is. So again, it's kind of backwards. The phase 4 marketing, or the drug has been out there, people are using it, and now the scientific community is trying to prove that it works. It's really hard to ignore results pre-post like this. So we're observing social media affecting the research here as well, and which is really pretty exciting. I guess the contribution that we were able to make is that the safety of it, which was questioned, in fact, paradigm shifting, is actually at the level of that what you would need for a drug. So back when the information was about the level of a phase 3 clinical trials for drug development, we opened a private practice at Duke. This is now 10 years ago, and it's a relatively small kind of practice, but the first line treatment choice is the low-carb ketogenic diet, which is the medical term, LCHF, which is the popular term that doesn't really tell you if you have to be ketogenic or not. So keto is actually the more specific, on the bottom right of the slide, more specific term that means you're in ketosis somehow, but if you're losing weight, your hunger's gone, you're losing inches, you're having ketosis, fat burning, and if you want to measure things, you can. So let me just show you, next slide, of some results from the clinic. We were able now, while we have no research funding, to look at this. We have now gotten some information out of our clinical database computer. It's called Electronic Health Record. We've seen 4,000 patients, over 28,000 clinic visits. Since we started 10 years ago, the average age is 51 years old. Most are female. And in Durham, North Carolina, it's about 50-50 Caucasian, African American. The BMI on average is 40.5 for people coming to a clinic for this kind of care. The payer mix is about 50% private, meaning insurance, it's mostly insurance pay though. Public insurance, meaning Medicare, Medicaid, about 50% in our clinic population. We have better data with weight change over the last 5 years, and we've helped 2,000 patients lose 26,000 pounds at this clinic. So can we have a little applause to that? And it's actually pretty simple. So let me demonstrate how one way you can do this. And this has actually become the clinic of last resort at Duke, where people have gone everywhere. And when I ask, though, what have you done? I've done everything. Well, have you ever tried that low-carb diet? Well, no. So most people didn't know it was an option, or they weren't taught about it. And so be careful when someone, I've tried everything, just probe just a little bit. You know, someone says they're doing a low-carb diet, just ask what they're having for breakfast, and you'll get an idea of whether they really know what they're doing. So I even have now a growing number of patients whose heart is so bad that they have an implanted pump and it whirs like a whir. There's no heartbeat, there's no pulse, and they need to lose weight before they can get a heart transplant. Now these are probably the most sick people that an internal medicine doctor will, in an outpatient setting, will ever see with bad heart. In fact, it's not working. They're on anticoagulants. They have diabetes, often all of these other factors. And all we do is take away the carbs. There you have to have the modification of the vitamin K and the salt into the diet plan. Lymphedema, post-bariatric surgery, weight regain. The harsh reality is about half the people after weight loss surgery, even the strongest ones, if they don't address lifestyle, they will regain the weight. So it's not a long-term fix. So there are a lot of advantages to use the low-carb diet in terms of obesity treatment and diabetes. Oh, you do have to kind of create the cultural environment. So people come into the room and they, wow, you can have bacon. Some people go in, is that sarcasm? Are you trying to? And I finally realized the reason why I say that was a joke is that most people are not used to hearing sarcasm from a doctor, right? You want the truth. You don't want the sarcastic doctor. How do you know when they're telling you that you should or shouldn't eat bacon? You know, oh, it was a joke. No, it's okay to eat bacon. 5 grams of sugar in the entire bloodstream. People see this, and then over time, why would I want to ever have more than a teaspoon of sugar? It'll double or increase my blood sugar tremendously. Absolutely. Urine ketones still works. the cheapest way to look at ketones, but I don't make people do that. So this is an example day with 25 people in a mature obesity medicine clinic that just uses the low-carb, high-fat, or keto approach. And if you look, I went through a day in the low-carb Breckenridge video that I did this year. And I can't go through all of that, but if this intrigues you, go back to watch that video. And I didn't cherry pick in that video. I went through just, not everyone was doing it, and so I pointed out how you figure out things. But this is my world now, which is fantastic. I created this clinic and created my own job 10 years ago. It's fantastic. We're trying to scale that up, teaching other doctors and even with other companies. And I use a flow sheet so I can teach doctors who come to visit. On the far left column, this is the first visit with weight being the number at the top, weight in pounds. And the second visit is after a teaching class. And so this person lost from 302 to 258 pounds. So there's a teaching class that I don't see or don't show. If someone comes for more visits and they have more sheets of paper, then I carry over the beginning weight here on the upper left. So this person started at 241 pounds, was down to 229 pounds. Of course, you just heard talks saying don't look at the weight. When someone has a lot of weight to lose, they have extra adipose tissue, they have obesity. Weight is actually a good marker most of the time of success in terms of fat burning. And while it is just one tool, here I also look at the waistline, waist in inches, and as you probably know, it's not something that happens overnight, and there's a whole process to weight loss in general, including the keto approach. These days, you can do the medical approach to diabetes, and this is the perspective that I have. People in the medical world want you to be a good diabetic. In fact, I've learned now that we don't call anyone diabetic or obese. You don't say, what you just say is that this is an individual affected by diabetes or affected by obesity or something like that. So that's kind of some code language for, that means you don't have to have diabetes forever. So you can be a good diabetic, eat the carbs, take the insulin or the medicines, gain the weight, and then have all of the bad things that can happen. Or you can not be diabetic. It's your choice. Currently, the only sanctioned, meaning there are lots and lots of studies at high levels for a treatment called weight loss surgery. Weight loss surgery fixes diabetes, no question. But weight loss any other way will do it as well, including the keto approach. But the studies are not to that level of phase 3 marketing at the FDA so if you were going to say keto is, you can market diabetes in the US with high level money, it doesn't meet the drug criteria. Although you're seeing results in people and in the world out there, even though it hasn't reached that level of evidence, we call it, and that's why most of your health practitioners, healthcare administrators, healthcare system doesn't know about it, and will hold off and be intellectually lazy until it reaches that level. So that's why it's a grassroots change. You don't have to wait for that level of information, level of evidence. So can they stay on LCH? There's just the flow sheet in long view. Absolutely, you can. People can. Can you imagine back in the 1970s, someone saying, "Hey, let's make treadmills," and everyone's going to be buying treadmills. And in the 1970s, nobody. Did anyone have a treadmill in 1970? Can you think back? And now they're commonplace. So the world around us is just changing with things like Ketofest and new cauliflower crumbles or cauliflower rice products. So it's going to get easier and easier for people to stay on the low-carb diet, the keto diet, low-carb, high-fat, keto, all the same thing. if you're under that 20, 30, 40 grams of carbs a day. I don't make people write down what they eat at home. You can do that. And I was in front of a world expert at an obesity meeting and said, your program won't work unless people food journal, write down everything they eat at home. And I had done enough studies to really realize that, to think to myself, well, I don't want to use what he's using, because if you have to write down everything for that program, none of my patients will do it. So coming to something that meets the practicality, the how much effort is really needed, I just have people complete a qualitative food record, it's called. You know, hey, what are you having for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Have you fill it out before I get in the room. It takes me about 30 seconds to look it over, and there's no need to write down what you eat at home. You give out a list of foods, people choose the food they like. It's an infinitely individualized approach, and I do nothing. Dietitians are trained to sit down with you. What foods do you like? What don't you like? Food preferences. They take a lot of time, figure this out. I just say, choose what you like from this list. It's brilliant. I didn't come up with it. Jackie Eberstein and Dr. Atkins came up with that method. There's no need to buy products, to take medicines, to eat what you don't like. I mean, you can do those things, but you're probably not going to stay on that very long. So people choose their own food. They get tasty food. There's side benefits like no heartburn. This is the second most common medicine I take away from people. It's about, I would say, 98% effective for heartburn relief within 1 week. And so diabetes medicines are the first medicines that we take away, the most common. Also heartburn, and then over a period of weeks to months, the blood pressure medicine as well. So you have to have diabetes, hypertension monitored in some way with a clinic or by yourself. Just be aware that this is not, you know, your NIH diet that doesn't work very well. It's a diet that is very powerful. If you're on medications, the medications can become too strong. More and more people are coming to me for the treatment of, enter disease here, cancer, PCOS, other problems like Alzheimer's, things like that. We don't have high-level evidence saying that these work. It's not to the level of FDA approval for marketing for a drug, if that's the level of evidence you need. In fact, the state of the science is so bizarre that there's a keto pet sanctuary in Texas that's treating dogs with terminal cancer and finding changes, and yet we can't do a study in humans. Is that bizarre? I did learn from Professor Feynman. Maybe he can tell you a little more detail about what Professor Feynman and Professor Fine are doing in terms of cancer research. But it's exciting, nonetheless. But I, with one foot in the medical world, requiring phase 3 level, you know, just, I mean, it's kind of an arbitrary level, but I want a lot of level of evidence before I sign off and say, with the confidence of a prescription, this will work for your enter disease here, okay? And I think this one was just to point out the simplicity of it seems to me that the more words on the page, either the trouble there is with some food addiction or or maybe they're trying to hide things. I had one person who came in, a lot of words on the page, and she circled every carbohydrate on it just to show me. Kind of bizarre. So if you're still dealing with addiction, you're on and off, you can't stay with it, it's an addiction. Pure and simple. People say you have to eat, but you don't have to eat junk. Most common mistakes early on, and then later on, and then I'll conclude. No rice? Well, what about brown rice? So the fundamental teaching has to be correct. You have to learn how to add 2 + 2 before you get into calculus. And if you're down the rabbit hole of measuring a ketone and you haven't figured out that brown rice is going to raise your blood glucose and cut off ketones as much as regular rice, we have some fundamental teaching. So no potatoes, what about sweet potatoes? No fruit. But everyone says fruit is healthy. Oh no, just check your blood sugar an hour later. No bread, what about whole? But now we have low-carb versions of these things, and it's great. I'd like to see evidence in lots of people, blood sugars going down. What's really cool at this conference is the grassroots research going on. The study that's being done here is on cholesterol. It reminds me of when I went to a state fair to find the blood pressure and check the blood of the elusive chewing tobacco user. I could only find them at state fairs. So I went out, and so now we have a researcher here, and thank you for volunteering for these studies, because that's how a lot of this stuff gets started. So fruit-infused water. Oh, so this person was doing well and then not well. And I said, well, what's different? She said, well, I started having some water flavored with fruit. Well, you know how you put a couple berries in or a cucumber, in my mind, and you pour the water. And I said, well, describe what you do. She said, well, I get the can of pineapple. And I pour it in the pitcher, syrup and all, and then I pour the water in. But Doc, I wasn't having fruit. So, and then of course on the top 10 list of, you just can't believe this, the no-carb diet was interpreted as the no-carbonation diet. So, I'm pretty clear now to always say carbohydrate, or even address that. Now, in the defense of this person, there is a teaching to not have carbonation if you've had the gastric bypass surgery. Because if your stomach is made smaller, you can actually rip the staple and explode your stomach. So this is one reason why we teach, and then we follow up. Make sure things are working. There are some things that you just can't imagine that someone might do. Do you have to calculate macros? I don't ask anyone to calculate a macro, but you can do that if you want. The wild card there is the fat contribution from your body fat early on is going to be filling in, so you don't have to eat to a certain level. But that's kind of new science. Again, it's the early precincts coming in. And if you choose to do it, you want to do it, you find some result, I have no problem with that. It's just you don't have to do that. Here's the person who crossed out the carbs for me, I know this is bad, and no shame, no guilt. I won't do that for you. I'm sorry. I'm just here to support you. A big issue, apparently, especially if you come at this through recent books that have this food quality component to it. This approach has worked before there was ever grass-fed beef, before there was ever this issue about oils and all that. So there's a progress versus perfection element that you've already heard today. So it's okay if you have great food quality, and it's probably optimal to have grass-fed beef, no processed foods, no artificial sweeteners, farmers market, locally grown, and all that. But if I wasn't able to accommodate the burger, no bun, 2, 3 bacon cheeseburgers, no bun at McDonald's, then 2/3 of my patients wouldn't be able to do this in North Carolina. So the science says just avoid the carbs, keep the carbs low, regardless of the food quality, and this will work for the metabolism change that you want. However, if you want to go this extra mile, it's okay, but you have to measure your own parameters and then gauge whether it's worth the extra time, expense, effort. I'm still not convinced that there's a general, again, stepping back, phase 3 level evidence for a drug. There's really not any evidence that these kinds of changes have a huge or clinically relevant incremental benefit for the kinds of things we're trying to accomplish in the clinical setting using the keto diet. The most common mistakes later on, and a lot of you who've talked to me, thank you. I want to hear your stories. I want to help as I can or connect you to other resources. The most common mistakes later on is that word that starts with a C, too many calories. Calories matter, it's just they don't have to be counted on a low-carb diet. You can count them, you don't have to, And later on, for just about everyone, LCHF, or keto, becomes what's called a low-calorie diet. But you can thwart this. You can have festivals where you're able to have unlimited bacon and do that. But, you know, most of you who've been doing this a while are up there just having one or two. And early on, though, there's this need to have more, and usually that just fades away over time. Habit eating, you know, eating because it's time to eat. The intermittent fasting idea is interesting. If you're one who needs that sort of structure, I'm all for it. But if you're depriving yourself, you're feeling hungry different times a day, and you only eat in a certain time of day, I'm not for that. Our general recommendation is to eat when you're hungry, based on your body signals, not based on a clock or a book or what other people say. Social eating, I mean, this one is, I always go out with my friends on Thursday and I can't not eat the bread, pasta, rice, fruit, you know, enter carb here. Over time, you realize that you don't want anyone else making decisions about your health, especially if it's diabetes. I mean, but in the clinic, I've been doing this a while. I have the confidence to say, look, if you do this, it's going to work. But I can't make you do it. And that kind of confidence takes a while. Again, I want to have the confidence like giving a drug to treat sinusitis or an ear infection. I want to have that confidence, and I do. The love of eating, the alcohol, zero carbs but high calorie, these are common mistakes that I see. The unlimited amount of oils that you drink or eat, they have calories, they can thwart the weight loss. Of course, the science that we have is unpublished. It's the gentleman in England, Sam Feltham, who created the public health collaboration where he ate lots of calories of 3 different diets. He gained weight on the keto diet, but he ate a lot more calories than you would think to be needed, and he gained less weight than with the other types of calories. So a calorie is a calorie outside the body. Inside the body, it's more complicated than that. At the end of the day, calories matter in terms of trying to get your fat mass, the weight that is fat on your body, down, okay? I wouldn't have a job if these issues weren't important. So we can help you with those things. Learning a new way requires forgetting the old ways. It's okay to eat fat, right? It's okay to have salt. Well, not if you have high blood pressure or a history of heart failure. And so now, you know, anyone can watch this video and go and do it. Don't have more salt if you have a salt-sensitive condition. It's okay to have meat with fat, not lean meat. That's kind of the old language, lean meats, like the chalk, fingers on the chalkboard. Medical, eating a banana is the only way to get potassium. We joke that's really all the cardiologists know about nutrition. Well, in a positive way, they all know that you can't eat fat, right? That's the, and that's sarcasm. Okay, thank you. Canned meats, how many of you grew up with Spam, you know, as a kid? You know, if you don't like it, you don't have to have it. But if you lived in the big island of Hawaii, there are 20 different types of Spam in the grocery store. If you were in South Korea, you'd be probably told not to have it when there are some versions of it that are very low in carbs. A medical student has the intellectual property for this mind-erasing device. It actually makes noise like the Men in Black movie. Again, this is sarcasm, but I'll joke about it that if someone perseverates and just can't get out of the old way of thinking, it's like I'm teaching someone to drive on the left-hand side of the road. Of course, the feedback for that is a lot more immediate if you don't do it. Do you have to exercise to lose weight? No. And I know you've been told you have to exercise to lose weight, but and this one's kind of funny because people still don't understand what I'm trying to say. No, you've been doing everything that you've been told and it's not working. I know I'm exercising more and more and it's not working. Yeah, I know exercise doesn't work, but I'm exercising more and more. It must be something wrong with me. No, exercise doesn't work. And, oh, yeah. So But the rest of the world said, yeah, that's okay. You don't have to exercise to lose weight. People come to me in wheelchairs, and you know the Wall-E dystopian future movie of the electric wheelchairs that everyone's going around on, and they still lose weight. So diet is more important than exercise when it comes to weight loss, or the nutrition is. Oh, but you can exercise on a low-carb keto diet. Don't get me wrong. In fact, that's the serial killers 2, Professor Noakes, the people at CrossFit gyms are talking low carb, and you can exercise. Now, if you are high functioning, you may want to reduce the duration and intensity for a few days or a week or two. There are now websites and counselors who'll help you if you really want to make these transitions, you know, effortless and with minimal kind of side effects. So don't get me wrong, I'm all for exercise or activity is a better way to say it. Has anyone lived in Europe? You know, how many Europeans are out jogging? And you know, last I checked, it's usually the American tourists who are jogging around Paris. But you can exercise, don't get me wrong. Again, do you have to self-monitor? Well, no, you don't have to, or you could. This was an accountant who, you know, was retired, and he just used to writing things down, and he got a, you know, 50-cent book and wrote things down and helped him stay on track, and I look at it and, all right, you can do that. Let me just wrap up that the science behind keto lifestyles has come to the level of evidence that would be required for a drug approval at the US FDA. And we've really done the phase 4 marketing, it's called, for a new drug before the drug was approved. I mean, you can even take the hunter-gatherer paleo idea. If you saw Fathead, the movie, there's a great clip in there that I'll use for teaching, that if you put all of human history into a year, we've only been eating grains for the last day and all that. That's a great way to put it in perspective. The Duke Clinic that I've run has used a keto lifestyle as the first-line treatment for about 10 years. And if there was a epidemic of problems eating this way, I think I would have noticed it by now. Now, I don't have complete follow-up on everyone. Neither do the studies that we do, but it looks pretty safe, even in terms of long-term heart disease, that sort of thing. I have a lot of people with heart disease that are not progressing down this terrible pathway as predicted. A keto lifestyle is healthy. In fact, it's said, and I'd love to have new data with new modern methods, it's said that children are born in ketosis. I'd love to have, you know, 100 babies, have it checked. Maybe some of the doctors I've talked to who are here can do that. I can help you get it published as a paper. Can you believe that? Individuals with diabetes, hypertension, heart failure, gout, kidney stones require special consideration and monitoring that I just can't get into detail in this talk today. I'm happy to, how should I say, gratify, I mean, proud, I mean, it's just, at last, there are enough people saying, I want to do this, I want to get together and share notes. This year has been a doubling or tripling of the number of, because there are new conferences now, a new cruise this fall out of Boston. So join us at any of these grassroots movement sort of events. There's even one in Europe, in Mallorca, called Low Carb Universe, and then Low Carb Down Under that Rod Taylor has done. Hannah Botheus Hannah and her husband does the Europe one, and now Rod Taylor in Australia. I'm told also Andreas has a low carb cruise that goes from Sweden to Finland and back, and they had 600 people on the boat this last time. I'm also told under the radar that there was a lot of vodka being poured, but that's just a Swedish thing, I guess. Thank you so much for coming to Ketofest. It's great to see you.